Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for another horror premiere, and this time I'm ranking the films of the Evil Dead franchise as voted for on the recent poll I did on the channel. It was very closely followed by the Scream franchise as well, so don't worry if you voted for the Scream films to be ranked. I will be doing that fairly soon in follow-up to this video, so that will be coming to you very soon. But here we are to talk about The Evil Dead. And Evil Dead has 5 feature-length films. It does have a TV series. I won't be including the TV series Ash vs Evil Dead in this ranking video. So you have the original trilogy directed by Sam Raimi. Of course, the first film came out in 1981. Caused a bit of controversy actually for its graphic scenes. And it was a bit of a breakthrough film as an independent film for that year. And I also see it as something of a hallmark in the horror genre as a whole and in comedy horror in particular. This was interesting to find out. Actually, something I didn't know was the original Evil Dead film was like a short film called Within the Woods, which became a proof of concept for the feature-length film that later came out in 1981. Now, of course, besides the original trilogy that Sam Raimi directed, which certainly have very kind of specific feel to them in the way they were filmed, and having the sort of film technology of back then, and how the 2 more recent films we've had from the last 10 years have certainly quite a different style to them, and actually a little bit more on the horror side, I would say, less of the comic elements, but still having something of a comedy feel in some of the scenes, I would say. Certainly in the Evil Dead Rise, I think there is an element of comedy to that that does come through. And I think, yeah, that so you've got the 2 more recent films include the 2013 soft reboot directed by Fede Álvarez. And then you've got the 2023 film, the most recent one, directed by Lee Cronin, which is more of a standalone film for me, as it's where the story for the first time feels like whilst it's still got the same premise as the other Evil Dead films, it just feels a bit different in the story in that film, and the setting as well is different, of course, being in a block of flats. So anyway, let's crack on, because I'm getting, long enough introduction, so I'm going to start with my least favourite. Now, another thing I want to say quickly is this is going to be quite a contentious ranking, I think. So, I always say the way we experience films and albums and TV series, all these different kinds of art is always different. So, just remember that, because I'm sure there will be some out there, that some of you that love certain films from this franchise and won't like to see them low down on this list. But that's kind of how we're starting here, because my least favourite of these films is the original Evil Dead from 1981, and that may be very surprising. So, something with the original Evil Dead film I find in particular is the reason why it's my least favourite, basically, is I do find the scenes and the sequences and the way the film progresses, to me it kind of blurs into one a bit and just becomes a little bit samey with the way that things unfold and the possessions happen, all these kind of thing. To me it just kind of it just repeats itself a little bit in the way it feels as a viewer for me. I totally appreciate the artistic vision of Sam Raimi in this original film. I can see why people really rate the film. I think the performances are really good. Bruce Campbell, it's Bruce Campbell. And I think that it works really well as a comedy horror film as well. I think it's a really unique film for its time, but back then certainly. But for me, it's just, yeah, it's one that I can see if you grew up with these films, you probably absolutely adore them. You hate the fact that I'm putting this original as my least favourite. It's very rare that I do this with original films. But yeah, for me, actually, in this franchise, this one is my least favourite, and I have thought about it for a while, and yeah, I think it is actually my least favourite, Evil Dead 1981. And now my next least favourite, probably maybe even more contentious, is Evil Dead 2 from 1987, for similar reasons really, although I think for me this one evolves slightly better than the original film. I enjoy the Deadites in this film a little more, and particularly the sort of end scenes I really like and find very entertaining. I also like the driving scene in the early part of this film and how that unfolds, and really enjoy the creativity of all the animation stuff in these films anyway. But yeah, I enjoy this one a little bit more. I think also on the practical effects side, I think the second film looks just a little better than the first one. Excuse me. And therefore, I do enjoy that one a little more. That comes in at number 4, Evil Dead 2 from 1987. So where things get interesting on this list now, I think, or if they weren't interesting already, is my number 3 is Evil Dead 2013, the soft reboot of the film franchise. And you know, this film, I think, focuses in a bit more on characters, but that works in the film's favour. I wouldn't say that this film so it's much more focused in on the horror for me, this one. It's got, you know, because it's more recent, I think the practical effects obviously look very good, and, you know, probably a little better than the ones from the original films, to be fair. But, you know, the character of those original films isn't quite in this film, so you may criticise it slightly more for that, because it doesn't quite have the same sort of character or tone as those original films. It's a bit more serious in tone. You've got characters with some serious backgrounds and serious problems being introduced, like Mia and her drug addiction. But I really like the way that the film deals with that, and it still manages to sort of get some of those horror comedy elements in certain ways in this film, I think, you know. And I just really enjoy it. I think it's I like the story of the film. I like that it's still quite faithful, I think, to Evil Dead's lore and everything within the sort of original Evil Dead films. But it's still taking it somewhere slightly different, because I think of the character work in particular, and it's slightly more serious. I think this is a good film, as I think the previous two films, the original films, are good films as well. I think this is also pretty good. Yeah, it maybe lacks the star quality, not having the star quality of Bruce Campbell, really, but apart from that, it's a good film to me. That leaves 2 films left to rank in this Evil Dead film franchise ranking, and my number 2 is Evil Dead Rise from this year. So I went to the cinema to see this, and I loved the hell out of it. I really absolutely love this film. It could almost in time make it to my number 1, I suppose, potentially, but it's hard to say. For me, actually, this felt like, you know, it still had the spirit of Evil Dead, yet it really managed to do something, I think, a bit newer, both with the character development that the 2013 managed to do, but also with the new setting and the new, the slightly newer ideas coming in, and bringing back, I think, just a bit more of the comic elements into the movie as well, but doing so in a way which didn't damage the horror either. And I just felt that Evil Dead Rise, with everything, the performances of Alyssa Sutherland and Lily Sullivan, for me, stole the film. I mean, I thought the child actors were pretty good too, but for me, those two, they stole this show, and they were great. I also love the prologue scene in this movie, right? The starting scene. That is how you kick off a horror film. Wow. I mean, I was sitting in like I say, in the theatre, just thinking, wow, that is a good prologue. That is some way to start. That shot of the sort of at the end of the prologue with the river and everything. Wow, that is how you start a horror film for me anyway. That was a great beginning to the film. So yeah, Evil Dead Rise is my number 2 movie, believe it or not, although that may be controversial. That leaves my number 1 film from the original trilogy, Army of Darkness. Yes, I love the slapstick comedy of Army of Darkness, and I love it a lot. My favourite line in this film, there are some great lines here. You notice little details as well in the stop motion animation and the visuals of the movie, and how it all kind of, you know, how the lines lead little Easter eggs as well here and there, and I absolutely love all of that in Army of Darkness. Yeah, my favourite line is when Ash says, "Buckle up, bonehead, because you're going for a ride," and the Deadite catapults into the air in a really kind of super kind of comical way. And yeah, it's for me, this film, I find it refreshing because it is pure comedy pretty much. For me, there's still horror aspects to it, but it's almost pure comedy, which makes it almost as well feel a little bit like a Monty Python film, because it's setting in medieval times and stuff, or medieval era. It has a slight Monty Python-esque thing going on there as well, right? And yeah, I just really enjoy this. It's so much fun that it's my number 1. because probably, even though maybe you could argue it's not the sort of hardcore Evil Dead fans' favourite film as such, for me it's the most entertained I am, although very closely followed, I think, by Evil Dead Rise. As I say, that could rise to the top, no pun intended, but Army of Darkness I think is my favourite. That's my number one film from the Evil Dead franchise. So let me know how you rank these films in the comments. I'm sure your ranking will be very different from mine. I'm sure it's probably going to be different, right? But yeah, a franchise which has no duds, no bad films. I like all these films, I think, and yeah, even though I like the two like very original films slightly less, as I say, all of these are entertaining in their different ways and different tones, and different, like slightly different visual styles in some cases as well. But yeah, that's my ranking of the Evil Dead franchise. Let me know how you rate these films. Otherwise, from me, until next time, it's bye for now.